The station that nobody remembered. Nobody ever got famous working on Verath Station. It floated at the absolute edge of explored space, perched above a dead world called Corin 7, a gas-choked planet with storms that had been running for longer than human civilization. No life, no resources worth harvesting, no reason to be there, except one: silence. Perfect, unbroken, scientifically precious silence. Verath Station sat so far from busy space lanes that the background radiation was clean enough to hear individual stars breathing. That made it heaven for astronomers and nobody else. There were 287 people living on Verath Station. Scientists, engineers, cooks, a small medical team, and a security detachment of 14 soldiers who spent most of their days running drills that nobody expected to ever matter. The station had no warship docking ring, no missile batteries, one short-range defense laser meant for deflecting debris. The galaxy at large had no reason to care about Verath Station, and Verath Station had no reason to care about the galaxy. That was the arrangement. That was the peace. It lasted until the morning shift of Watch Officer Davin Oral. Oral was not the kind of person who made history. He was 31 years old, had a slow metabolism, drank too much tea, and chose deep space posting specifically because nothing happened there. He was 4 hours into a 6-hour night watch when the passive array threw a flag he had never seen before. Not a soft yellow caution light, a hard, crimson blinking warning that seemed almost embarrassed to exist, like the system itself was unsure it was reading correctly. He leaned forward and tapped the display. The passive array was designed to register background signals from deep space, the constant, quiet noise of the universe. It did not flag things, it absorbed things, quietly, peacefully. It was flagging now. Objects at extreme range, multiple, moving. Oral pulled up the long-range scope and ran an enhancement pass. His tea went cooled. The objects were not asteroids. Asteroids did not travel in neat geometric formations. Asteroids did not decelerate as they entered a system. These objects slowed down deliberately, like something that knew exactly where it was going. He counted, stopped counting at 80, and felt his stomach drop. He opened the command channel. "Station Commander, this is Oral on watch. You need to come to the bridge." He paused, then added the words he had never once used in 3 years on the station. "Right now, sir, please." Commander Yeva Strauss arrived in her sleeping clothes, still pulling her hair back. She looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. More objects had resolved while Oral waited. The formation was enormous, hundreds of vessels, arranged with the kind of precision that only came from long practice. "Send identification request," Strauss said. Her voice was completely level. The station's communications officer, a young woman named Pellin, transmitted the standard greeting. "Unknown vessels approaching Verath Station. Please identify yourselves. This is a civilian research installation. Please respond." The reply came in 17 seconds, in perfect, grammatically correct English. "This system is now the property of the Vorathi Dominion. You will stand down all systems and prepare for inspection." The bridge fell silent. Someone behind Oral laughed, the sharp, disbelieving laugh of a person whose mind has refused to accept what it just heard. Strauss did not laugh. She read the message again, then turned to Pellin.
Reply: inform them this station has no military function. We are scientists. Request direct communication with their command authority. The reply came in 12 seconds this time. Compliance is not a request. Then the fleet changed formation. The ships, vast, angular, the color of deep water, spread into a wide arc around the station, like a hand closing around something small. Oral watched the tactical display with cold clarity. Oral, Commander, I'm reading energy buildup across multiple vessels. They're charging weapons. Strauss put her hand on the arm of her command chair. She did not grip it. She simply rested it there, steady. All stations, emergency protocol. Open the emergency broadcast array. Pellin's hands were shaking, but her voice was not. Emergency broadcast is live. Transmit distress package, full data burst, coordinates, contact event, fleet size, everything we have. Compress it and send it on every available frequency. Transmitting.
The first strike hit the main communication tower. The station lurched sideways. Every screen flickered. The lights died for 2 full seconds before backup power kicked them back on. Red emergency lighting flooded the bridge in the color of danger. Arel gripped his console. Damage reports came in fast. The primary communication mast was gone. The long-range transmitter was destroyed. "Did the distress package go?" Strauss asked. Pellin's face was pale. "Partial burst, maybe 40% of the data before the mast went down. I don't know if it's readable." The second strike hit the outer hull of the science wing. Strauss closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, then she opened them. "Begin emergency shelter protocol. All non-essential personnel to the core compartments. Medical, get your teams ready." She looked at Arel. "Keep watching that fleet. Tell me everything." Outside the windows, the Vorathi fleet held its position, patient, certain of the outcome. They believed this was the end of the story. They had no idea it was the opening line. The bunker that did not exist. The signal arrived broken. It came in as a fragment, not a message, but a wound, a torn edge of data with most of its content missing. The antenna was a deep space listening post buried in a mountain range on Earth, 17 meters of concrete above its head, officially listed on no government document as existing at all. The post was part of a network that humanity had quietly built over 40 years, listening to the dark, waiting for the specific kind of silence that turns into something else. The signal lasted 0.4 seconds before cutting off. The AI system that caught it spent the next 3 minutes trying to rebuild what was there. Coordinates, station identifier, contact event, hostile action, the phrase unknown fleet, followed by a gap and then the words weapons active before the signal collapsed into static. The analyst on duty was a 46-year-old woman named Rasha Vel. She had worked in the bunker for 11 years. She had processed tens of thousands of signals. She had never once sent an upward alert at the priority level she sent one at now. Within 7 minutes, the bunker transformed. It did not look dramatic from the outside. There was no outside to look at. But inside, screens that had been idle for years came to life. Personnel who slept in the facility's lower levels were woken by a tone that none of them had ever heard in a real situation. Senior officers arrived in the command room within 12 minutes. An admiral, 2 generals, the director of space intelligence, who was rumored to have not slept more than 5 hours in any given night for the past decade. They stood around Rasha Vel's station and listened to the fragment play back.
the static, the coordinates, the words hostile action and weapons active, then nothing. Nobody panicked. That was the first thing Rasha noticed. These people had trained for this moment so many times that the real version felt to them like another drill, except for the small, almost invisible tightening around their eyes. The director spoke first. "Station identifier? Verath Station? Confirm." "Confirmed," Rasha said. "Population? 287 as of last quarterly report." A general asked the question that meant everything. "Did the full distress package transmit?" "No, sir. We received approximately 40%. The mast was destroyed during transmission." The room was quiet for a moment. Then the director asked for the AI assessment. The system had been processing fleet signature data recovered from the partial signal. It placed the result on the main screen.
Unknown civilization. No prior contact record. Fleet composition. Estimated 400 to 600 vessels. The word unknown sat there in the dim light of the bunker, and nobody looked away from it. Humanity had explored 200 light-years of space, had catalogued thousands of star systems, had found ruins of dead civilizations, had found microbes, had found beauty beyond all previous imagination, had never, until this moment, found anyone who could build a warship. The director turned to the communications officer. "Attempt contact with Verath Station on emergency frequencies." Static came back. Just static. "Survival probability?" asked the admiral. The AI had already calculated. Given fleet size, partial signal analysis, and time elapsed since transmission, 6 to 11%. The room absorbed that number. Then the director said 3 words that rearranged the air in the entire room. "Protocol Stillwater. Now." Rasha had never heard that phrase in 11 years. She watched what it did to the people around her and felt something cold settle into her chest. Senior officers moved without question. Screens shifted, new systems activated, encrypted channels opened that she did not have authorization to observe. She understood, in the way you understand things without being told, that Protocol Stillwater was not a defense plan. It was not a negotiation framework. It was the answer to a question that humanity had quietly, carefully, and with great deliberation asked itself 4 decades earlier. What do we build if they come for us first? The answer had been built. It had been sleeping, and now someone had turned the key. In a classified facility above the Antarctic Circle, in a research installation buried beneath the Namibian desert, in a pressurized station in the asteroid belt, and in 17 other locations that appeared on no public map, machines that had been dormant for years began to power up. They made no sound. They sent no signals. They simply woke, checked their own systems, confirmed operational status, and waited for the order that was already on its way. The director stood in front of the main screen. The broken signal from Verath Station played on a loop in the background, like a heartbeat that kept trying. She looked at it for a long time. Then she authorized the deployment. What humanity built when nobody was watching. The question had been asked in a room with no windows. 41 years before the attack on Verath Station, a gathering took place. No cameras, no recording devices. 12 people, a mixture of the finest physicists alive and the most powerful leaders of Earth's unified space authority, sat around a plain table and faced a plain truth. Humanity was not ready.
That was the opening statement from the scientist who had organized the meeting, a woman named Dr. Fen Voss. She had spent 20 years modeling hypothetical first contact scenarios, and the results had never been comfortable. The models assumed an alien civilization would have more time to develop than humanity. They would have more ships. Their technology might operate on principles humans didn't yet understand. If they chose to be hostile and struck first, Earth's conventional space forces, impressive as they were by human standards, might not be enough. A long war would destroy us, Dr. Voss said. We cannot outlast an opponent whose industrial base we cannot reach, whose technology we cannot match, whose psychology we cannot predict. A general asked the only question that mattered. So what do we build? Dr. Voss answered carefully. Something that cannot be answered. Something that ends the conversation before it becomes a war. What followed was 4 decades of the most classified scientific work in human history. The project was called Stillwater. Its goal was specific and terrible: to create a deterrent so absolute that no rational civilization would risk triggering it.
The scientists who understood stellar physics understood the answer first. Every civilization that develops space travel is anchored to a star. The star is not just a power source, it is the organizing principle of an entire civilization's geography. Every orbit, every colony, every trade route, every act of daily life is structured around the star's gravity and light. Without it, nothing else survives. And stars, it turned out, were not as stable as they looked. They were in constant equilibrium, a perpetual balance between outward radiation pressure and inward gravitational pull. Disturb that balance in precisely the right way, at precisely the right frequency, and the equilibrium could be broken. Not by brute force, by resonance. The first prototype of what eventually became the Stillwater beacon was the size of a cargo hauler and required more power than a small city. The final production model, 40 years later, was the size of a school bus and ran on a self-contained reactor. It had no weapons, no armor, no visible threat of any kind. It was a transmitter. A very specific transmitter designed to broadcast a signal at frequencies that would interact with the magnetic architecture of a star's core in the same way that a precise sound can shatter glass. The process took time, hours, sometimes days, but it could not be stopped once started. You could not unring the bell. Humanity built 9 of them. They were placed in deep space storage in separate, undisclosed locations. They had no offensive capability whatsoever in the conventional sense. They could not shoot down a ship. They could not destroy a city. They could only do one thing: travel to a target star system and begin a signal that would, over hours or days, destabilize the star until it collapsed. The leaders who authorized the program did not celebrate when the first functional beacon was delivered. They signed the authorization for deployment and storage in silence, because they understood what they had made: not a weapon of war, a statement, an answer to a specific question that no civilization should ever ask. What happens if we attack humanity first? The beacons slept in the dark between the stars for 4 decades. 3 different administrations had quietly debated decommissioning them during periods when it seemed humanity might never need them. The debates always ended the same way: not with certainty that the beacons would be used, with certainty that not having them was a risk no one was willing to take.
Now, in the underground command center on Earth, the Director of Space Intelligence stood at the authorization terminal. A general asked her, quietly, whether contact should be attempted first. She looked at the partial signal from Verath Station, the fragment of Pellin's voice saying weapons active, the coordinates, the date and time of transmission compared to the date and time of the fleet's first appearance in the system. The fleet had not sent a greeting, had not asked questions, had destroyed the communication array in the first strike. They had not wanted to talk, they had wanted to demonstrate. The director entered her authorization code. 3 separate officers inserted 3 separate keys. The locks disengaged in sequence. The Stillwater deployment order went out on an encrypted channel to a facility in the asteroid belt. In a hangar that never been opened before, 9 storage bays cycled their doors for the first time. 1 Deacon powered on, checked its navigation database, confirmed target coordinates, and, without fanfare, without announcement, without a single visible flame, it slipped into faster-than-light travel. The universe did not notice. Stars continued burning, planets continued orbiting, the Vorathi fleet above the ruins of Verath Station continued celebrating. They would notice soon enough.
The last day of the Vorathi's sun. Supreme Admiral Thrawn had commanded 47 campaigns. He had taken systems from 6 different civilizations, had reduced resistant populations to compliance through strategic infrastructure targeting, had written the tactical manuals used by a generation of Vorathi officers. He was considered, by his peers and his government both, to be the finest military mind their empire had produced in 3 centuries. He was not prepared for what came next. None of them were. None of them could have been. The Vorathi fleet had been above Verath Station for approximately 11 hours. The station had been secured. The surviving humans had been confined to their core compartments. Thrawn had transmitted his victory report to Dominion Command and was in the process of preparing a full assessment of human military capability, specifically the complete lack of it, when his sensor officer raised a hand. "Admiral, we're detecting an incoming faster-than-light transit." Thrawn turned from the viewport. "Human reinforcements?" "Unknown, sir, tracking only one object." The display showed a small shape decelerating into the system. Very small, smaller than any warship. Thrawn's initial reaction was the same as any experienced commander's would be. This was a probe, or a courier drone, or some automated system sent out before the station's communications were destroyed. He almost didn't bother to track it. Size classification. Sub-vessel, sir, approximately 40 meters in length. Thrawn watched it for a moment. It made no aggressive moves. It did not approach the station. It did not transmit anything. It simply drifted, apparently powered down, on a trajectory that carried it past the fleet without coming within weapons range. Then it jumped again. Gone. Vanished back into faster-than-light transit. One of his officers laughed softly. "The humans sent us a messenger drone, and it got lost." The bridge relaxed. Thrawn allowed himself a small, dry expression of agreement. He turned back to the viewport and Verath Station's broken silhouette. He would never know, in the hours that followed, that the beacon had simply used the transit past his fleet to update its stellar cartography, confirming the location of the Vorathi home system's star. It had not needed to stop. It already knew where it was going. The Vorath system was called Vorath Prime. Their star was called the Undying Eye by their oldest religious traditions.
It was a G-type star, slightly larger and warmer than Earth's sun, with 7 planets in its habitable zone. 3 of those planets were populated. The outermost supported 11 billion people. The innermost was the seat of their government, their oldest cities, the cultural and historical heart of everything the Dominion called itself. The beacon arrived in the outer reaches of the Vorath system without triggering a single defense alert. There were no defense alerts configured for objects of its size and signature. The Dominion's defenses were built to stop ships, military vessels, fleets. The idea of a weapon smaller than a shuttle was outside their strategic framework. The beacon positioned itself at a precise calculated distance from the star's equatorial band. Its panels opened, its arrays extended, it began transmitting. The signal was inaudible. It was not in a frequency range that any organic being could detect without instruments. But the star heard it. In the same way that a tuning fork hears the note it was made for, the star's magnetic architecture began to respond to the specific resonant frequency the beacon had been built to produce. The first indication came from automated solar observatories, a spike in magnetic field readings, then an increase in plasma temperature at the equatorial layer. Scientists at 3 separate research stations filed routine anomaly reports. One scientist, looking at the numbers, felt a strange unease that he could not articulate. He ran the measurements again. They were wrong. Not wrong in the way that instruments malfunction, wrong in the way that reality had changed. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called the Planetary Science Authority. The authority ran a full system scan. By then, the star had already passed the point of no return. The beacon's transmission was not a sustained attack. It was a catalyst. The first 10 minutes of transmission were enough to initiate a feedback process in the star's core that the star itself would continue. Magnetic pressure increasing against radiation pressure. Core temperature rising, the equilibrium that had held for 5 billion years, developing a fracture that would spread at its own pace, on its own schedule, until the balance broke entirely. The beacon transmitted one final signal, not to Earth, not to the fleet at Verath Station, to every active communications receiver in the Vorath system simultaneously, in 43 different languages, including the 6 most common Vorathi dialects. This is humanity's response.
5 words. No elaboration, no threat, no explanation of the mechanism or the science. Just the identification of the origin and the nature of what had been done. The reaction was immediate and total. Government networks collapsed under emergency traffic. Military commanders screamed for defense solutions that did not exist. Scientists worked at a frantic pace that even they knew was hopeless. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because there was nothing to intercept, nothing to destroy, no enemy vessel to engage. The star was not being attacked from outside. It was being unraveled from within. At Verath Station, 11 hours from everything, the surviving staff huddled in the core compartments. Commander Strauss had been using a low-power emergency communicator to maintain contact with her people. She did not know about the beacon. She had not been told about Protocol Stillwater. She did not know why the Vorathi fleet, which had been preparing to move deeper into human space, suddenly went very, very quiet. Watch Officer Orel, his face lit by emergency lighting, watched the alien ships through a damaged external camera. He saw the ships halt, saw communications traffic spike across the fleet's frequencies in a way that their passive array could detect even now, even broken. He saw organized movement turn to something else, something less controlled. "Something happened," he said quietly. Strauss looked at the camera feed. The alien ships, which had been moving in perfect formation an hour ago, were now stationary. Some of them were moving away from the station entirely, as if they had forgotten it was there. "Yes," she said, "something happened." Neither of them knew yet that 11 billion people were looking up at a sky that was getting brighter. Supreme Admiral Thran received the emergency transmission from Vorath Prime 14 minutes after the beacon had begun its work. He did not understand it at first. The communications were fragmented, not because of signal degradation, but because the people transmitting were not maintaining discipline. He had never in his career received a communication from his home system in which trained military officers were not maintaining discipline. He ordered silence on the bridge and played the transmission at full clarity. He heard scientists explaining an impossible stellar event, heard defense commanders demanding weapons solutions that did not exist, heard a government official, he recognized the voice, had met the man twice, speaking in a way that Thran associated not with military crisis, but with something older, something that Vorathi culture had largely set aside over their long centuries of expansion, something that sounded like genuine fear. Thran opened an emergency channel to the Home System's Military Science Division. He received a response from a senior researcher who looked as if she had not slept in days, despite the fact that this had only been happening for less than an hour. "What is causing it?" Thran asked. She told him. One object, 40 meters. Passive signature consistent with a transmitter, not a weapon. Already gone, it had powered down or jumped, but the process it had started in the star could not be stopped because there was nothing to stop. The star was doing it to itself now. Thran stood at his viewport and looked at the broken station below and understood, in a complete and irreversible way, that he had committed the greatest strategic error in Vorathi history. He had looked at Verath Station, its tiny size, its civilian population, its single defense laser, and concluded that humanity was not a serious military power. He had processed human space, its scattered colonies and modest fleet tonnage, and rated the species as an early-stage civilization with potential for development, but no immediate threat value. He had been measuring the visible parts of the structure and ignoring the foundation. He opened a fleet-wide channel. His voice was level. That was the last professional gift he gave his crews, a commander who did not show them the bottom of his own despair. All vessels, stand down from operational posture. We are no longer in an offensive situation. He paused.
We are in a negotiation. He did not specify what they were negotiating. His crew understood. You negotiated when the alternative was extinction, and the alternative right now was a star collapsing around 11 billion of your people. Thran transmitted to the human emergency frequency, the one the station had been using before its main arrays were destroyed. He identified himself, requested contact with human command authority. His tone was not the tone of a conqueror. It was the tone of a person standing at the edge of something vast and dark, feeling the ground shift. He did not receive a response for 4 hours. He spent those hours watching his fleet's morale collapse in slow motion and doing his best to maintain enough order that his people did not lose themselves entirely. He spent them listening to transmissions from the home system that painted an increasingly clear picture of a civilization discovering what the end of its own story felt like. When the response came, it was not from a military officer. It came from a woman who identified herself as Director Vel of Earth's Space Intelligence Directorate. She was brief. She was not unkind. She asked 3 questions. Thran answered all 3 truthfully. Then she said, "The process your star is undergoing is not reversible. We want to be clear about that, not as a threat, but as a fact. What is reversible is the trajectory of this relationship between our species." Thran processed her words carefully. "What are you proposing?" "Survival," she said, "for as many of your people as can be evacuated in the time available. We will provide coordinates for uninhabited systems within our space that can support your population. We will provide humanitarian assistance during the transition." A pause. "We are not at war with your people, Admiral. We are at war with the decision that was made to attack a civilian station without provocation or warning." It took Thran a long moment to understand what he was being offered. Not victory, not even peace in the traditional sense. A handhold, a path out of the darkness that his own command had created. He thought about his 11 billion people watching a sky that was brightening in the wrong way. He thought about what Vorathi culture valued above almost anything: continuity. The line of history maintained across generations, the long story of the species kept alive. "We accept," he said. Back at Verath Station, Commander Strauss and her surviving crew were evacuated by a human rescue vessel 12 days later. 219 of the original 287 had survived. They were brought home. Watch Officer Orel stood on the rescue vessel's observation deck as it pulled away from the remains of the station and watched Corin 7 recede in the distance. The dead planet with its endless storms, the station where nothing happened, except that it had once mattered completely. The story of what happened was never released to the public in its full form. Most humans went about their lives not knowing. The Vorathi evacuation was framed as a humanitarian operation in response to an unprecedented stellar event. 40 million Vorathi eventually settled in 3 systems within human space. They were not prisoners. They were not conquered people. They were, over time, neighbors. The still water beacons were returned to storage, all 9. The one that had been used was decommissioned and replaced. But the galaxy had noticed. The stellar collapse of Verath Prime's sun was visible at distances of hundreds of light years. Civilizations with long-range observatories had tracked it. The timeline of events, a Vorathi fleet detected moving into human space, a colonial distress signal, and then a star dying, formed a sequence that required no interpretation. Humanity had not pursued the Vorathi fleet, had not issued threats or demands, had not mobilized warships, had sent something small and silent and utterly final, and then offered the survivors a place to live. In the years that followed, diplomatic overtures arrived from 7 different civilizations. All of them were careful. All of them were respectful. None of them were accidental. Humanity accepted each one with the same measured warmth. They did not boast, did not display what they had built, did not need to. Somewhere in the dark between the stars, the beacons waited, quiet, patient, invisible, and the galaxy knew they were there without needing to be shown. On Earth, in a city that stayed awake regardless of hour, Well walked home through streets full of ordinary human noise. People arguing about rent, children running, street musicians playing for no particular reason. She had worked 36 hours straight and then quietly submitted her resignation from the bunker. She was done. She stopped on a pedestrian bridge over a canal and looked up. The stars were faint through the city light, but they were there. Somewhere among them was a settlement of 40 million Vorathi people learning how to live in a place that was not home. Somewhere among them was the empty space where a star used to burn. Somewhere among them, 9 small black objects drifted through the silence, waiting for a call that humanity hoped would never come again. She had been part of the moment the galaxy changed. She had been the one who caught the signal, who sent the alert, who set the sequence in motion. She would never be able to tell anyone. The work would never carry her name. She was fine with that. The stars were quiet tonight. The streets were loud and warm and full of living. The universe had understood something important about the species that lived on this small, bright world. They did not want war. They had never wanted war. But they had looked at the darkness honestly and asked themselves what it would demand of them, and then they had built the answer. Quietly, patiently, completely. No civilization fires first at humanity twice. Not because humanity is the most powerful, not because humanity is the most ancient or the most technologically advanced, but because humanity looked at the worst possible question, what happens to us if something out there wants us gone, and answered it with such perfect, quiet, terrible completeness that the question needed never be asked again. The stars burned on, the galaxy listened, and out in the spaces between suns, where light takes years to travel and silence is its own kind of speech, the message was understood by anyone with the instruments to read it. We did not start this, we finished it. We hope you will let that be enough.